All right, welcome to Redirect Immigration Law Perspectives. I'm Stephen Robbins. I'm here with Matthew Archambault. How are you?
Well, I'm well. How are you, Stephen?
I'm fine. We recorded an interview today and your internet was just the worst.
I don't know what's going on. It seems like it's fine. I did a nice little speed test and everything. I don't know what's going on.
And then right when we finished, you hopped on and you're like crystal clear. So
maybe I should not have been playing Fortnite while I was recording.
Yeah, maybe you should have turned off your Twitch stream. So look, how are things in your practice, in your life?
So my life's great. I'm very blessed. I do have to say, and I think our interview today will, more like your interview mostly today, will suggest things just are all types of up. Even during the Trump era, this just seems to be maybe as messed up and discombobulated as ever. I know we're not supposed to say that there's a crisis on the border. I don't really consider, humans coming over the border to be a crisis, but it's the way the administration is handling it or not handling it seems to really be
a crisis.
A crisis for a crisis of policy.
Right.
In a lack of policy, lack of direction. And the thing with Trump, when Trump was there and he was doing all these awful things, everyone could kind of band together against Trump, right? Now it's like, and we knew it was going to be like this, right? You have this group of people banding together against these policies.
Against the horses.
But you have those other people saying, hey, give him a chance. Now, this stuff is really hard. And also, they're still blaming Trump. Well, these are Trump's policies. What can Biden do? Not do those policies. I mean, that's a choice.
Yeah.
So it is a weird time, and I don't like it. How's that?
Right. It would be one thing if the administration got caught sort of flat-footed. The issue here is that they have been actively and aggressively fighting to keep in place the Trump policies that have led to this. So they're no longer Trump policies. We should really probably stop calling them that. I mean, that's their origin. But at this point, the Biden administration, they're sending their attorneys into federal court armed with specific arguments in defense of those things. So at a certain point, they have to own it, and they have to own these are our policies. Title 42 is now a Biden administration policy. That's, I think, the thing that is so disheartening and so exhausting from all of this. Because, yeah, you could imagine a situation where there's just a surge in or an increase in people seeking asylum, and you get the images on TV, and maybe they haven't built up the capacity to deal with so many applicants. That would be one scenario, but that's not this. This is so much worse.
Yeah, and I think what is frustrating as well is, there has been a surge. We'll just keep using that phraseology, right? That we seem to love to use with, but there's been a surge of immigrant rights advocates who have entered the Biden administration. And I would be really interested because I am not as in tune to who these people are. Twitter is a universe unto itself. And every time some new immigrant rights advocate would enter the administration, there would be, a little fanfare, oh, this person's great, that person's great. I would love to have a list of these people and check up on them. What are they doing? Because I'm not going to say there hasn't been any positive changes, and we have spoke about some things that are positive, but we expect a lot more, especially with the level and quality of some of these people that went in there. And, I'm just really interested to hear what is going on. So any of these people, and I think they probably know who they are if they would ever possibly listen to our show. If you want to talk to us off the record or something, talk to us. And I, hear about a lot of these people, and they're really good people. They did really good work. And I can't believe they would just walk into the Biden administration and be like, yeah, those immigrants, I just don't believe that. So What is going on? What are those internal struggles? And why are they losing so badly? Or are they losing? Is this one of those things where all of a sudden we're going to see this big explosion of goodness come from the administration and everything's going to be fixed? I mean, I'm not seeing it. And we'll talk a little bit to Lindsay. I know she'll mention a lot of what she hears about the internal struggles and the politics of what the Biden administration thinks they should be doing for public support and all that. And it's going to sound really familiar to what the Obama strategy was. But yeah, I'm really interested to hear, what have they been able to accomplish? Because it doesn't seem like they've accomplished a lot. What we've gotten is more from the Attorney General's office, right? Rescinding ARCG and LEA and all that. And I'm probably overlooking some good stuff, but...
Well, our friend of the show who refuses to come on, Hamid Ali Aziz, he's a journalist with BuzzFeed News. He wrote this piece.
Is he not going to go on until the Ben Simmons get traded to the Trailblazers? Is that what he's holding out for?
Then he might come on. Hopefully. We'll see. He interviewed 20 different government officials, some Biden appointees, others career staff at DHS. You can check out his Twitter. It's at HALEAZIZ. He's great follow. Here are some of the quotes from that piece. Quote, "There is a complete lack of direction," said one administration official. "Everything is deferred to the White House NSC, who can't see past low polls on immigration and are terrified their own shadow may be a pull factor. Career and political staff are equally concerned." Another administration official echoed those remarks. Quote, "I don't know what our immigration strategy is at all," the official said. Other officials were more blunt. Quote, "They are almost exclusively focused on detention, deterrence, and generally treating asylum seekers with as much violence and inhumanity as the prior administration. Honestly, I don't know how much longer I can stay at DHS if this continues. The administration's immigration policy is schizophrenic," said one senior DHS official. "Their words are not backed up by policy choices or deeds. The border would be challenging under any circumstances, but this administration is stuck in deterrence-only posture." So there's a great piece with more quotes, basically highlighting what you're indicating, that there's not really a coherent strategy, that a lot of people within the administration are really disappointed with the lack of direction. And it seems like the people calling the shots are not the ones who have, legitimate concerns about immigrants, but the ones who think that if we can act Trumpier, then that will improve low poll numbers, which is, I don't know what kind of...
have they not been paying attention? That's what kills me. Like, if it had been shown to be effective, I would get it. I wouldn't agree. I would understand. But it has never shown to be effective. So this is what befuddles me. And to those people who are on the inside trying to do the right thing, if you can't make them do the right thing, leave.
Right.
And make noise when you leave, because that does have an effect.
It's weird because Trump had poll numbers when he was doing this stuff. So
if being Trumpy on immigration worked, he would still be president.
Like if Kids in Cages rocketed Trump to an 80% approval rating, we'd still be against Kids in Cages. We'd have to admit politically, we got to get a couple kids in cages, right? It really is proven to work. But, Trump sat in the low 40s, I think his whole administration pretty much. Just really strange.
If you're not convinced by what we're saying, just watch right-wing news and hear how they talk about how we have an open border, how they'll say what's going on with the Haitians is disgusting and it's inhumane. It's like a third or fourth or fifth or eighth world country. I don't know how many countries they go down to describe the situation. But of course, their solution is to get rid of the Haitians. But they think we have open borders.
Right.
That's what the administration should focus on, like what they're saying, and say, okay, I got it. We're not going to please them, and let's just move on.
There's nothing more enraging and cynical than Kayleigh McEnany tweeting out concern over the treatment of Haitian immigrants at the border. As if
she's concerned that they're not being sent back
fast enough, right?
That's the concern. But
anyways, let's get to the interview. It's good stuff, good insight. Matthew and I both practice immigration law, but we're not at the border every day. And that dynamic is constantly shifting, and it's a very specific part of immigration law. So we're really happy to have an expert on who works on those issues every single day. We're going to be talking with Lindsay Toczylowski out of
and
Los Angeles.
is quite frankly should be considered one of the heroes of immigration law for the work that she's been putting in. And honestly, that's I didn't get really a chance to tell her that, but I really have a lot of respect for her, and she is pretty amazing.
On the other hand, she did come on this show, so it does call into question some of her
judgment.
Yeah. So that's on her.
So thankfully, you won't be hearing much of me in the next after we leave this intro, but enjoy.
So Lindsay, just so you know, we do have a producer, pretty fancy, I know.
Wow.
He will clean this all up and make us sound smart.
Oh, good.
He does bleep swears, so you can say whatever, and it'll get bleeped. It'll be perfect.
Good to know.
So that my mom can enjoy the show. That's how that works. So Lindsay Toczylowski, did I say it right?
That sounds good.
That's a no, but okay. We're really happy to have you on the show. Tell the folks at home a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. I'm the co-founder and executive director of a nonprofit in Los Angeles called the Immigrant Defenders Law Center. We also have offices in Riverside, Santa Ana, and San Diego. And I founded the organization in 2015 with my co-founder, Susan Alva, and we've grown really quickly from 6 of us working out of my living room to now over 120 folks working throughout Southern California and in Tijuana and Mexicali, really just focusing on deportation defense and also on increasing access to the asylum system.
Now, do you know Nora Phillips?
I do, yes. I've known her for probably 10 years.
It sounds like you guys are competitors. So if you ran into Nora Phillips in an alleyway, I mean, it's a knife fight, right?
If we saw each other in an alleyway, we would just give each other a big hug. We're good friends.
Not a knife fight. Well, all right. I'm disappointed. I thought this was going to be a more contentious situation, but that's okay. Now, so you do a lot of stuff on the border.
Yeah.
Okay. That's perfect because I think, I talked to my mom last night. It was my birthday, and my mom has CNN on in the background sort of always. And she doesn't like Trump, but she's not super thrilled with Biden. She's, sort of just vaguely following the news. And she noted that the situation is chaotic, right? These are the images that people are getting on the news. So I want to try and sort of sort through what's going on, talk a little bit about the dedicated docket, which is not a rocket docket.
Supposedly.
That's what we've been told. Not a rocket docket. It's been rebranded. It's the new Coke. For folks who seem confused or overwhelmed with some of the images they're seeing, can you give us the Reader's Digest version of how we got to this point?
Yeah. Well, almost 9 months ago now, when Biden took over, I think a lot of us assumed that the number one thing that he would be doing is figuring out how to reopen our asylum system so that people could begin to be processed into the United States when they come to seek protection. It's a really basic thing. And in 9 months, because of his choice to continue to implement Title 42, which is essentially a public health law or decision that makes it so that you can't access the asylum system. But that public health decision, it's not based in public health. It's a way to make it so that people can't access asylum at all. And so because of that, no one has been able to seek protection in 9 months. Adding on the fact that there was no ability because of Remain in Mexico and Title 42 to access asylum for almost 3 years before that, there is a pent-up demand for people to actually be able to seek asylum. And because of that choice not to sort of begin to process people, it led directly to what we're seeing on the border this week. And it is chaos. I mean, that's a That's a fair assessment. When you completely block people from accessing protection 100% across the border for this long, people are desperate. And there's seemingly no plan to continue to process people in an orderly way.
Right. I hate analogies that turn immigrants into like objects or things, but if you imagine a garden hose, and if you fold the hose in two and you create a kink or a stop, the water is going to get backed up, and there's going to be pressure, and eventually, that pressure builds to a breaking point. And that's sort of what we have here. We've got, again, the previous 4 years, and then an additional 9 months when the administration refused to do anything in a way that I think has surprised most of us.
Yeah.
Some of the obvious, easy fixes, they've been fighting in court, not just like we haven't gotten around to it, or we're super busy, sorry, we forgot to do that thing. No, they're sending their attorneys into federal court to say we need these Trump era policies to stay in place to keep the hose kinked, essentially.
Yeah. And ImmDef has actually 2 cases that are challenging different aspects of the Remain in Mexico program. And, we're seeing that. We're seeing that these cases aren't settling. And I think one of the most disappointing things was a couple of weeks back when, in the Wisha case, the government chose to appeal the decision that they couldn't continue to subject families to expulsion. And so I think when we see these Trump era policies that were so damaging, I mean, for those of us who've worked on the border, seeing families that have been separated, seeing families that lost folks, seeing people who are, being pushed back into just horrific situations of rape and kidnapping and all of these things, to see the Biden administration not only quickly figuring out a way to rescind that policy that really isn't about public health, because we know that there is an ability to process people humanely, to keep people safe, to do testing, to distribute vaccines at shelters in northern Mexico. We know it can be done safely. For them to appeal that decision was really devastating. And then to see what's happened and what's come on the heels of their decision to do that is just, it's shocking that they don't realize how their decisions to continue to implement Title 42 have led directly to what's happening right now.
Right.
And I look at situations, in the early days of them dismantling the Remain in Mexico program, they did things like emptying out the camp in Matamoros. And the argument had always been that if you start to empty out these camps, it's going to be like a zero-sum game where people are leaving the camp and immediately more people are coming in because now that they see you're processing people. But it doesn't work that way. We saw that camp emptied out and it's remained largely empty. And it emptied out because people were humanely processed and able to, mostly join family members that are already here in the United States who have been hoping for their families to be able to join them to seek safety. And so I think that inability for people to access the system at all, really, it flies in the face of everything that the Biden administration is saying now when they say, we're punishing people and putting them on planes to a country in crisis because they didn't do it the right way. That holds absolutely no validity when there is no right way to seek asylum right now because you've dismantled the system, and they've chosen to continue that.
Right. Yeah.
Well, can you hear me now?
Yes. Wow.
I wasn't on for a few minutes. Did you mention that they're not using horses anymore? So, I mean, have you guys mentioned that? Have you brought that up?
Lindsay, I was going to say,
it's a big deal. Big deal.
Lindsay's kind of over here being a Debbie Downer. She hasn't even mentioned that the problem's basically been solved. They send those 2 horses to the glue factory and Lindsay's still complaining. I think it proves that some of these liberals just can never be satisfied. We're going to get to the horses. Thank you for bringing that up, Matthew.
I mean, it's really important.
It is important. That's why I
think Biden just this morning addressed it on CNN. So maybe your mom was watching.
Yeah.
But he did address the horses. And my response was, because I'm never happy, what about the deportation flights that are taking off this morning?
Yeah.
Sending people from El Paso to...
Again, there are no horses on those flights.
Exactly.
So they say.
But I think if you want to be consistent about the horses, I think the horses should be on the flights. Is what
Support the horses.
If the horses are really the problem. I saw that today too, that Biden not only went after the horses, but the officers. And I think that's what a lot of people were sort of confused about. This press secretary talking about, we've gotten rid of the horses, and those images were really disturbing. And everyone was thinking, well, the horses aren't the problem. And then the president comes out today and sort of expresses anger about the officers. That gets us maybe half a step closer to the problem. But the reality is those officers were enforcing Title 42 and the administration's policy choices. And so what were they supposed to do? Like hand out a gift bag and then, kick them back to the other side of the river? I mean, obviously they were saying things that were horrendous on some of those videos, and the actions that they were taking were overly aggressive, but there's really not a nice way to do a Title 42 expulsion.
Right. There's no nice way to violate someone's human rights on the border when they're desperately trying to cross a river holding a baby.
Right.
I mean, I think the other thing about that, though, is when I see Biden or Secretary Mayorkas expressing, outrage about the officers, they've known for a long time that the Border Patrol is one of the most lawless agencies that exists in the United States. So the racism, the cruelty, that's also not new. They could have addressed that prior to these images being broadcast. And that's another choice that they made, not to address the gross human rights violations that happen every single day at our border, that happened in 2018 on Thanksgiving Day when families were tear gassed in Tijuana. This has happened for a long time. This agency has been known to do this. And so, yes, the horses are an issue. Yes, what happens an issue. I suppose for the Biden administration, for Secretary Mayorkas, it's more of an issue because it's so public and people saw it firsthand. But their behavior is nothing new. And they so far have not chosen to go through that agency and actually ensure that these things aren't happening.
Right.
Hopefully that'll change now. But again, the behavior of those officers, it's gross, it's shocking. Even for me, it was shocking to see those images and in the videos. But what we didn't see was then the people who actually were taken into custody being chained, put on a plane, being told that they were going to another part of the United States and then landing in Port-au-Prince where their very lives may be at risk, and no one even asked them what was the reason that they were seeking asylum.
Right.
One of the mantras that you'll hear from the Nazi era is just following orders. We don't excuse the officers for just following orders. But again, what you guys are both saying is we really have to look like, what are the orders? What are the policies? And what's interesting to me is how the media is looking at the issue. If you listen to Fox and the right-wing media, they'll say how inhumane this is, how these Haitians and other migrants are living in squalor conditions, and it's really horrible. But their solution is to send them back to Haiti. And on the left wing, it is really kind of a mixed message. They don't really seem to have a message. But I think that's because Biden doesn't really have a message. We want to treat them humanely, but they really seem to be confused. Lindsay, do you have a sense as to what their policy goals are?
I think that there is clearly internal conflict among factions in the administration that are trying to figure out, and frankly, the faction of those that believe in protecting human rights and restoring humanity on the border apparently are losing this argument. But I think there's internal conflict between looking at the well-being and the humanity of people who are seeking protection on the border and those who are looking at poll numbers and for some reason believe that this sort of deterrence-only strategy, this looking at ways to sort of continue the cruelty that we saw under the Trump era will help them politically, that it'll make them look, it's almost like the tough on crime version in immigration, trying to look tough all the time and afraid of what will happen if they treat people humanely. And the worst part about that is that there is no way that they could do anything that is going to get hardcore Trump voters who believe that even what they're doing right now is open borders. There's no way they're going to get those votes. But I think that there are lots of people, Stephen, maybe like your mom, who are watching this on the news, who are becoming increasingly disillusioned by what they're seeing. Because when I was sitting in Las Vegas on election day doing 14 hours of voter protection, this certainly wasn't what I thought we were fighting for. I didn't think we were fighting for people that would come in and worry about polls more than they worried about human lives. So I think there's a real internal conflict. I don't think there's a clear strategy here. Initially, right out of the gates, they said that they were going to be dismantling the Remain in Mexico program. That was a day one promise. They began doing that. It worked well. There's, certainly a lot of critique that could be laid on them and how that process happened and who was left out of the way that they did it. And their real externalization of the process to UNHCR was something that I think continues to be an issue. But they really seem to have lost their way at this point in terms of what the policy strategy is. And I think there's real conflict. I wouldn't be surprised if we start to see more of the resignations and protests that we saw this week with the Haitian ambassador as well.
Right. Well, one thing I tried to impress on my mom last night is that it looks like a lot of people. It is a lot of people. But almost everyone I've ever worked with who's come seeking asylum has family in the United States. They've got a place to go. I've never personally met somebody, I'm sure they exist, but who came to the border seeking asylum knowing zero people in the United States with no place to go. Like they're going to come here and just be homeless. Like maybe it happens, but it's very, very rare. So all of those people have some place to go. They're not all going to your neighborhood. That would be intimidating if all of a sudden there were 10,000 people just in your neighborhood, but you might get a handful or a dozen or whatever, maybe just one or probably zero. Those people will be spread out and immediately start contributing to their neighborhoods, their communities, and their societies, and will be better off for it. That's something that I think people really need to keep in mind. And also when Jen Psaki says that all they're doing is enforcing the law, they're not. They're enforcing this one narrow Trump thing that was invented by Stephen Miller. And all we're not suggesting that everyone in the world should get to come here immediately. We're just suggesting that they go back to like what the law actually is and that people be given due process and allowed to apply for asylum or other relief. And that, yeah, the administration should take it a step further and should be paroling Haitians and should be granting TPS and being much more aggressive in the ways that they can. But at this point, we would settle for literally just enforcing the regular law. Yeah, so it's very frustrating. I did want to ask you about the dedicated docket, because all this talk about the border being hermetically sealed and all these flights of people who aren't even technically deported, they're just being returned to Haiti. And yet some people are still being allowed in to seek asylum, and they're being placed on what they call a dedicated docket. It used to be called the rocket docket, and now they're calling it something else.
I still call it that.
Right. Well, we were told by our chief judge in Seattle that it is not a rocket docket, folks. It's been completely rebranded. It's something totally different. And so people might be getting a little bit of whiplash having just had this long conversation about Title 42 to hear that, but actually we're still letting some people in. So how is that working exactly? And why can't we just do this, but with the Haitians?
Right. So, one of the things that I think is the most tragic about the current real lack of border policy and lack of asylum is that there are sometimes people who either, as immigration lawyers would say, iwi, who enter, between ports of entry without being inspected, and usually are caught fairly close to the border by Border Patrol. Those folks right now, it's really hit or miss. Some of them are being expelled back into Mexico, depending on their country of origin. Some are being held and then being expelled to places like Haiti. And some are being paroled into the United States when that happens. And there's really no rhyme or reason to it. even some of the like high numbers that we're seeing of encounters at the border right now are really just people who are repeatedly expelled into Mexico and then desperate because they came to seek asylum in the first place are re-entering another time and being caught. And each one of those is being sort of tagged by the US government data as another apprehension at the southern border, but really it's the same family, the same person. So I think because of the inability for anybody to access the system, we're seeing this happen. So for whatever reason, sometimes it's because of the day that they were apprehended, that a family, there was no room for them, no ability for CBP to Title 42 them, to subject them to expulsion. Some families are let in. There's also other families, because of their vulnerabilities, because of medical issues, that they once apprehended, Border Patrol makes the decision to parole them in. Usually it's not because of vulnerabilities, unless an attorney is involved in fighting for that. It's usually logistical in nature that they make that decision. Because of this, it also creates a situation for families at a shelter in northern Mexico where how do you advise people on this? As you know, when we're going down and speaking to families in a shelter and they're asking us what will happen, normally as lawyers, we have some good sense of, well, this is the law and these are the risks on the different decisions you make. But in this instance, we're saying Title 42 is in place. So what should happen, or what we expect to happen, or what the risk is that you'll be sent back. But of course, you know, there are families that are getting through. And when you have desperate people sitting in shelters, hoping that they can get to safety, people are going to take that risk. And that's also why what I've been doing, in addition to our border work and the dedicated dockets and work in court, we've also been at the emergency intake sites here in Southern California for unaccompanied children. And one of the reasons that those facilities were so full over the last 6 months was because families are actually having to make the difficult decision to let their children go ahead. And in many cases, that's after the entire family has been subjected to Title 42. So for some of these families, they are ending up on this dedicated docket. Los Angeles is one of the cities that has been designated as lucky enough to get rocket dockets revived in our community. Before this happened, there were some community stakeholder events where many of us who provide pro bono services in the area were told that they were hopeful that we would be able to take on cases, that was really the plan, that the agencies that take pro bono cases, they even hit up the local law schools to see if the clinics, you know, could take that one case a semester that would really make a dent in the capacity for families to get representation. And that was the plan, was for there to be this sort of massive call for pro bono attorneys. The truth is, in LA, almost no organizations, between our detained work, between the unaccompanied minors work, no one magically has capacity to take cases off of this rocket docket. And so we told them that. We asked them not to move forward with this. We were told that they would also be funding a family group legal orientation program that would do essentially like LOP as it happens in detention centers, but for family groups at this docket. We were also told the immigration court help desk would be a resource for families. And, you know, we just kept saying all of those things are meant to connect to pro bono attorneys, but there's no capacity here in LA. No one can take these cases. And so then on August 17th, the docket started here. I went to court that day to observe. At the beginning, you know, we spoke briefly with the judge and reinforced the idea that there are no attorneys that are going to be able to take these cases. But then I sat through every single case, and every single case that day literally was a mom with a baby. There were literal, you know, moms carrying infants up to the counsel table. And then they were asked basically through the process, like, do you want more time to find an attorney? And then they were handed the list of attorneys to call in Los Angeles, which the judge knew.
You've already explained to them that they don't have capacity.
Yeah,
to take
like
these
the
cases.
judge is handing that list and telling the family, come back in a month so you have time to find an attorney. But he's already been told, and he knows, and I know sitting there, that every single person that they call on that list does not have capacity. So to me, the families are being set up to fail. There are all sorts of other due process issues that happen on that docket that I'm happy to talk about. But, I think the real issue is that these families are on an expedited timeline. Their cases are going to be decided quickly, and the vast majority of them are going to have to do it alone. And there's just no way that they'll be able to access the protection they need, to access justice, to access relief without an attorney. And EOIR is aware of that. The judge is aware of that, but it's being pushed forward anyway.
Yeah, it seems like they've managed to be incompetent in both the regular docket and the rocket docket. So we have asylum seekers who came in 2017, 18, 19, whose notices to appear have still not been filed with the immigration court. And these are people who want to go to court. They want to present their cases, and Border Patrol has just not filed the paperwork. Or now, in some cases, I think the court is sitting on boxes and boxes of notices to appear, and they just haven't gotten around to putting them in the computer yet. So these are folks who are really in a strange limbo, and that causes all kinds of problems. So if they move, they're supposed to notify the court, but their case isn't with the court. So the court will say, we will reject your change of address form because we don't know who you are. So these people have been waiting years, and that's a specific kind of cruelty and incompetence and inability to manage the system. And now what we've done is said, for these recent arrivals, we don't want them to languish in court forever because they might actually settle down and establish roots here. So we want to speed up the case, not so that they have increased access to justice, but to really facilitate their removal. Those people are also denied certain rights and protections, like you're saying. It's just going to be impossible to find competent representation on such short notice. They're expected to come back in 30 days with an application filled out in English somehow,
right,
and to understand the ins and outs of the law and to file an application that puts them in the best position to win.
It's more of this deterrence only strategy. It's the reason that they're putting families that entered without inspection on that docket, in our conversations locally has been is this a punishment thing? And the logic of that is really insane if you think about it. I mean, what they're trying to say is that somehow people who are desperately trying to seek asylum in northern Mexico, who are sitting in shelters trying to decide what to do next, will magically hear about a family that entered the United States that is now on a rocket docket that is having to go forward quickly on their claim. No one knows stuff like that. To think that somehow creating this docket that denies people due process will be part of the deterrence strategy. It was the same thing with the rocket dockets for kids in 2014. They created that hoping that somehow desperate children would know that their cases would have to move forward quickly, and that would be some kind of deterrence to seeking asylum. All of the deterrence only strategies miss the point of why people seek asylum. But, the idea that this dedicated docket is somehow going to change people's decisions who are seeking protection is perhaps one of the biggest logical leaps that I think the administration's taking.
Well, there's some breaking news, and this will probably fix it because Merrick Garland is reaching in for some expertise to run EOIR. Fresh faces, people that are going to bring unique perspectives that are going to change everything. He just announced the appointment of David Neal as the director of EOIR. So, a real outsider. He's been outside the agency for about a year now. He was formerly, I think, heading up the BIA, but he's now going to be the director of EOIR.
So not exactly an outsider, somebody who's probably not super inclined to mix things up. I don't know too much more about David Neal. Do you know who that is?
I've heard that name, but I don't know much about him at all. I'm not surprised. It's definitely not an outsider. And EOIR needs, obviously, to be completely reimagined. Our entire system, I think we just hit 1.4 million cases pending, more than 100,000 here in Los Angeles alone. these are human lives that are living in limbo. And then when you go and sit in that courtroom, I mean, sitting through the dedicated docket, I've now sat through it a couple of times. I plan to go back and see if magically those families that got their 30 days to find an attorney, I'll be going back in a couple weeks to see if they actually got their attorneys. I'm imagining that it will be more of the same, moms walking in with infants in their arms and no one there to help them. But, sitting through that and watching what is considered justice in those courtrooms is really disheartening. I think people don't realize what's happening, like here in Los Angeles, in this extremely progressive city, in a courtroom, downtown Los Angeles, every single day, people's rights are being violated. On a day when I was there recently on the dedicated docket, there was a woman who didn't speak English or Spanish. She spoke Quechua, and the interpreter didn't know the difference between Quechua and Quiche. And so she kept mispronouncing the name of the language that the woman was asking to have it interpreted into. And that woman, like everybody else, was just given more time to find an attorney, which I imagine, is extremely difficult for everyone who needs to go find an immigration attorney, especially if you're an asylum seeker, especially if you're low income, but even more so for Indigenous families on that docket, which if the current numbers of folks who are coming in, we see it with unaccompanied minors, more than half are from Guatemala. Currently at the Pomona emergency intake site, lots of those families will be on this dedicated docket, and the inability for them to have their case expedited and find counsel is going to be that much greater.
What do you know about Carrie Doyle, who was appointed to head the Office of the Principal Legal Advisor of the ICE attorneys? Do you know anything about her?
I don't.
People seem really excited. She was in the private bar as an immigration attorney, and that seems like maybe a small piece of good news. Maybe they'll actually start exercising the discretion that they have at their disposal.
I would hope so. But it's a big ship to steer, right?
Yeah.
And
exactly.
It's amazing how trial attorneys in the department can never exercise discretion without, like, the moment a new case comes out, they're unable to, like any normal attorney, interpret that case and decide what they're going to do. But in a case where they do have discretion to benefit a respondent, it's very rarely exercised. And in cases where them saying that they're waiting for their higher ups to give them guidance in a case where it's going to be harmful to the respondents, it always seems to be that they, will wait forever for that guidance. So it's just, I wonder how much the frontline trial attorneys will really be impacted by that leadership. But hopefully, I'm feeling very cynical this Friday morning.
I know, right? Yeah. But I mean, they could have appointed, at this rate, it could have been, literally Stephen Miller. It seems like that would have been on par with their other decisions. So
I think he's too busy advising on the current border policy.
That's right. He's got a lot on his plate. So yeah, maybe some small good thing, but I'm also not holding my breath. The PD memo was leaked. It wasn't even released. It was leaked in May. And I kind of thought, oh, we're back to the Obama era policies on prosecutorial discretion, and we're not. It's not anywhere close. I will wait and see. I'm not going to get too stoked about one new hire in a sea of terrible. So thank you so much for your time. I'll let you go. You've been with us a long time. If you want to come back in a couple of weeks and let us know how the dedicated docket is moving along, I'd be really interested to hear your observations.
Sure, that sounds great.
All right, take care, and thanks again for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Bye.